they used to say Africa was blind. They said Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger would never see anything but desert, chaos, the shadow of colonialism that had lasted for centuries. But then one night, in the quiet skies of the Sahel, a secret was revealed. Russian military technology, sharper than any weapon, brighter than any promise, fell into the hands of a new generation of leaders. Ibrahim Traoré did not just sign an agreement, he tore apart a veil that had been hidden for hundreds of years. What had been hidden by the West was now power in Africa's hands. This is not just a story about satellites. This is a declaration of sovereignty, a turning point where empires tremble, where borders are redrawn in the night sky. If you believe this secret belongs to Africa, stay with us, like, comment and subscribe. Because this story is just beginning. According to a recent international report, Russia has signed a landmark satellite deal with 3 Sahel countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. The deal not only provides advanced surveillance technology, but also opens a new era in which Africa will for the first time control its own airspace. For decades, the West has built bases and provided military aid, but left behind ragged borders and endless insurgencies. Now, with their own satellites, Sahel countries can observe every inch of their territory, stop the flow of violence, and manage communications without asking anyone's permission. But this is more than just a technological deal. It is a direct blow to Western supremacy, and the beginning of a larger secret that is about to be exposed. Some nights, the Sahel sky looks like a black sheet ripped open by a cold streak of light. Not a shooting star, not a trail of bomb smoke, but the first signal from a newly deployed Russian satellite system. The villagers of Gao raised their heads, the cowherds of Talabri looked up, and the young soldiers of Ouagadougou whispered, "We are no longer blind." For centuries, Africa has been forced to see the world through the eyes of others, maps drawn by colonialists, information controlled by foreign radio stations, weather data pouring out of weather stations in Paris or Washington. But now a new generation of leaders has decided to reach up to the sky. They are not asking, nor are they waiting. They are rewriting their own destiny with a weapon that never belonged to Africa, the eye of space. To understand why this moment is so seismic, one must look to the recent past. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, 3 countries in West Africa's crisis belt. For decades, they received aid, hosted expeditionary troops, and were supervised by the European Union, France, and the United States. But what was the result? Instead of stability, these lands became wastelands, where rebels ran rampant, where borders were torn like wounds that would never heal. France set up bases in Gao, the United States operated drones from Agadez, but villages were still burned, roads were still cut, and Sahel children were still growing up amid gunfire. People were slowly realizing, those bases were not there to protect them, but to maintain an old order, a chain of interests hidden under the guise of security. Then Ibrahim Traoré stood up. He was not a Sorbonne-educated politician, nor an aging general in a Western-style ceremonial suit. He was the face of a new generation, young, bold, unyielding. When Traoré said, "Burkina Faso doesn't need foreign soldiers. We defend ourselves," it was not just a declaration for Ouagadougou, but a thunderclap that echoed across the Sahel. In that empty moment, as France withdrew in disgrace, as the United States began to retreat, as ECOWAS became a lifeless shadow, Russia stepped in. But this time, not with Kalashnikovs or mercenaries, but with a more sophisticated weapon, satellite technology. For Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, it was the key to breaking the chains. Satellites could not only help them track rebels moving through the jungle or desert, but also redraw the map of power. An orbital signal could give an early warning of a strange convoy approaching a border. An image taken from space could reveal a cache of illegally mined gold. A secure satellite communications channel could connect military commanders without the need for fiber optic cables in Paris. For Traoré, this is more than a technical agreement. It is a reversal of the balance. The West once used information as a shackle, now the Sahel uses the sky itself to break it. Imagine a group of young soldiers in Mopti. Before, they had only paper maps, old pickup trucks, and fragmented news from the people. They were always late, always falling into traps, always on the defensive. But now, a small screen in their hands shows satellite imagery, rebel trails, the location of hidden weapons caches, even the direction the wind blows across the desert. For the first time, they are not running after the enemy, they are one step ahead. This is the power of technology. And it is also what the West fears most, an Africa that is no longer dependent. As soon as the agreement was announced, the French press called it a major geopolitical risk. Washington warned of a new Cold War on African soil. But behind the accusations is a real fear, if the Sahel controls the skies. The model of dependence that the West has built for centuries will collapse. France has lost Mali's gold, Niger's uranium, its base in Burkina Faso. Now it risks losing its monopoly on information. Empires do not collapse with a bang, they collapse in the moment a people see it with their own eyes. Here, we need to pause and think. Many people mistake sovereignty for the number of tanks or soldiers. But no, in the 21st century, sovereignty is also about data, about information, about who has the ability to see what is happening on their territory. If you don't control the sky, you can never really control the ground. The West understood that a long time ago, so they kept their satellites to themselves. And now, with the Sahel having that technology, another door has opened. If you believe that the right to see with your own eyes is as important as the right to bear arms, share your thoughts in the comments. Because this is not just a story for the Sahel. It resonates for all of Africa. But every step forward comes at a price. Russia is not just giving away satellites out of friendship. They know that the Sahel is a land of gold, uranium, oil and gas. In return for technology, Russia wants mining contracts, long-term influence. The question is this liberation, or just a new form of dependence? Traoré and his allies know this trap. But for them, the difference is choice. For the first time, they can bargain, they can set conditions, they can sway alliances rather than bow down to it. That is the essence of freedom, not absolute freedom from all influence, but freedom from a single chain. On the streets of Bamako, people carry Russian flags among their national flags, chanting Traoré, Assimi Goïta, Abdurrahmane Tiani. They are not shouting for Putin. They are shouting for a new era, one where young leaders dare to challenge the old model. A generation is waking up. They understand that satellites are more than technology. They are symbols of self-determination. When a nation can see its entire country from space, it can also see its path to the future. The West will not sit idly by. Economic sanctions, information warfare, even shadowy coup plots, it has all happened before, and it will probably happen again. But this time, the Sahel is no longer alone. They have allies, data, and people behind them. And above all, they have faith that history has changed course. The light from the Russian satellite over the Sahel is more than a signal. It is a sign of a shifting global balance. An Africa that was once forced to bow its head is now looking up, looking straight ahead, and seeing more clearly than ever, its enemies, its resources, and its future. But every bright light also casts a shadow. The question is, will the Sahel retain its autonomy, or will it fall into a new, more sophisticated, more dangerous spiral of dependence? The answer, we will gradually see in the next part of this journey. Imagine, in the night sky of the Sahel, where hot, dry winds blow across the golden sands, there are no longer just silent stars, but new, steel eyes. They are Russian satellites. Controlled from command centers in Ouagadougou, Bamako, Niamey. For the first time in history, these poor but proud African nations have an unprecedented tool in their hands, the ability to observe themselves without having to beg for data from Washington, Paris or Brussels. This is not just technology, it is symbolic. A symbol of breakthrough, of reclaiming sovereignty over the skies, space once considered the permanent privilege of the West. But with every new power comes challenges. The West has not hidden its anger. The French Foreign Ministry called the deal a dangerous act that undermines the security order. Washington warned, these satellites could be used to support illegal forces. ECOWAS, which is seen by the Sahel people as an extension of foreign powers, held an emergency meeting, condemning the Russian presence as a threat to regional stability. But behind these accusations lies a naked fear, for the first time. The old empires no longer have a monopoly on space information. Let's ask, why did Traoré dare to go so far? Why did he not tremble when he signed an agreement that the whole West considered crossing the red line? The answer lies in the historical experience of Burkina Faso, a country that has been eroded by intervention. civil war, and violence orchestrated by others. Traoré understands that, to liberate the territory, you need an army, but to liberate the future, you need to master the sky. Russian satellites not only provide eyes on the battlefield against terrorism, but also open up the possibility of controlling borders, managing mineral resources, forecasting climate, and protecting information networks. This is the basis for true independence. From Bamako, Assimi Goïta sent a message: imagine for a time when we no longer had to rely on anyone else to know what was happening on our land. That is freedom. In Niamey, President Tiani stressed, without technology, sovereignty is an empty shell. Satellites are the shield of the 21st century. These words echoed not only in government halls, but also in markets, schools, and villages. The people of the Sahel began to feel something they had never felt before: pride that Africa could also touch the sky. But remember, the West never lets go easily. Immediately, the international media network launched a smear campaign: the Sahel sold its soul to Russia, Moscow used satellites to build spy bases in Africa. Financial institutions threatened to withhold aid. European powers discussed imposing technology embargoes and blocking international trade. They wanted to turn the satellite agreement into a pretext to contain the Sahel, just as they did with Iran when it launched its nuclear program. But unlike Iran, the Sahel is not alone. Behind Traoré, Goïta, Tiani, a whole movement is rising: the AES, the Alliance of Sahel States. These are no longer three small countries divided, but a united bloc being tested by fire. Under siege and intimidation, the young leaders understand that they must either advance or be crushed. It is at this moment that the Russian satellite becomes a symbol not only of technology, but of solidarity. We can see the sky for ourselves, and we can decide our own path. In Ouagadougou, a ceremony is held when the first images from the satellite are sent back, a heat map of the northern region, where terrorists often hide. The military commanders stare at the screen, feeling as if there is another pair of divine eyes illuminating the darkness. Traoré stood up, his voice deep and resolute: from now on, no enemy can hide in the dark. No base can be built behind us. This is the beginning of our century. And at that moment, the tension reached its peak. Because the Sahel not only possessed the tools to protect itself, but also held in its hands the ability to shake the global balance. The West knew well, if the Sahel succeeded, Congo, Ghana, Nigeria, even South Africa could follow. And once a series of African countries became self-sufficient in space technology, the world order they had built for hundreds of years would crack. Look deeper: satellites do not only monitor terrorism. They can monitor mining activities, track ships carrying gold, uranium, oil. That means for the first time, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali can control where resources flow, who steals, who colludes. For decades, foreign corporations have been secretly draining the Sahel of its treasures, while governments have been blinded by the lack of data. Now, with the eye of the sky, there is no room for darkness. And that makes the West tremble more than any gun. But this rise is not simple. There are also anxious voices within the Sahel. Is dependence on Russia any different from dependence on France? Is the satellite truly for Africa's benefit, or is it just a geopolitical tool? These questions resonate. But Traoré's answer is clear: there is no absolutely safe path. But it is worse than remaining in chains. We choose to walk, because freedom is never given, it must be earned. And it is in this spirit that the Sahel is entering a new phase, one in which every step can cause shock. The image of Traoré, Goïta, and Tiani standing together under the night sky, pointing to the space where the satellite was flying, became an icon that went viral on African social media: three young warriors, three despised countries, now daring to reach for the sky. Young people from Dakar, Accra, Kampala, even Johannesburg shared the image with a single sentence: Africa has awakened. Part 4 is not only about technology, but also about the spirit. The Russian satellite, the Space Shield, has become a rallying cry for the people. It has awakened the desire that Africans can control their future. That the fate of the continent does not have to be in the hands of others. But at the same time, it has also ignited a new confrontation, the confrontation between those who want to keep Africa in chains and those who dare to break the shackles. The big question hanging in the air is, will the Sahel be able to withstand the full-scale revenge from the West? Will Traoré and his allies be able to turn the space shield into a solid foundation for true independence? Or is this just the beginning of an even fiercer war? Because once you dare to touch the sky, there is no turning back. In history, major turning points have always been marked by conflict. Any people who dare to regain their right to self-determination, any country that dares to break the chains, must face the revenge of those who once held power. The Sahel is no exception. When Russian satellites began to scan the sky, when the first images showed maps of gold, uranium, oil and gas, when each terrorist camp was discovered with just a glance from space, that was also the moment when the West decided to unleash all its power to put out the fire in the egg. The familiar method was immediately deployed. First was financial warfare. European banks blocked transactions related to Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. International shipping companies were forced to stop all operations at Sahel ports and airports. The CFA currency, already a chokehold, was stirred up, causing the Sahel financial market to stagger. The goal was clear: to strangle the economy, turning the rise of technology into an unsustainable burden. But then the unexpected happened. The people of the Sahel did not panic. They did not rush into the streets demanding reconciliation with the West as before. On the contrary, markets, youth groups, and women's groups spontaneously organized self-help campaigns, selling goods in local currency, exchanging directly, and setting up food reserves. Walls in Ouagadougou were covered with slogans, "No CFA can buy our future." It was this endurance that shocked planners in Paris and Washington. Then came the information war. CNN, BBC, and France 24 simultaneously broadcast reports on the terrible human rights situation in the Sahel, on Russian manipulation, on the suffering of the people under the military regime. They built up the image of Traoré, Goïta, and Tiani as bloodthirsty dictators, deliberately ignoring the millions of people demonstrating in support of the new leaders. They wanted to plant a message in the minds of the world: the Sahel is not a liberation revolution, but just another puppet regime. However, once again, it was satellite technology that broke the information monopoly. Satellite images proved what the people of the Sahel were shouting: the terrorists were not popular resistance, as the Western media claimed, but armed groups that had been sneaking across borders. Satellites recorded suspicious convoys departing from foreign bases. Satellites exposed the truth: violence did not originate from the people, but was nurtured by foreign hands. When these data were released, they spread like wildfire across Africa, and for the first time, the Western media empire lost its monopoly. Without stopping, the West turned to political warfare. ECOWAS was incited to hold an extraordinary session, passing a resolution demanding the return of power to a civilian government. They threatened to send troops to maintain the peace, essentially a way to reconquer the Sahel under the guise of legality. But this time, the Sahel people did not accept. Hundreds of thousands of protesters in Bamako, Niamey, Ouagadougou held banners: "Democracy is not a cover for colonialism," and "We have chosen our leaders." The pressure from the people made even some ECOWAS countries hesitate to intervene. Meanwhile, inside the Sahel, satellite technology became a strategic weapon. Armed forces no longer fought in the shadows. They could predict terrorist movements, block supply lines. For the first time in decades, the Sahel security map changed from bright red to safe green. Villagers began to return to abandoned land, planting crops, building schools. The feeling of controlling territory, something that was once just a dream, is now a reality thanks to the steel eyes in the sky. The West, frustrated by the ineffectiveness of its tactics, began to discuss tougher measures. Intelligence leaked that some NATO countries were considering deploying special forces to disable satellite control centers. The rumor spread, adding to the tension. But Traoré responded with a chilling statement: "Anyone who touches our strategic infrastructure is declaring war on the entire Sahel Alliance. And we are not alone." The words were echoed by Moscow and several other allies, as a warning that the Sahel was no longer an easy prey. In the context of confrontation, Traoré's image became even more legendary. He was seen wearing a simple military uniform, sitting with soldiers looking at satellite maps. He was seen walking among farmers, explaining how space technology could help predict harvests. Saw him on the podium, his voice resounding firmly: "We are no longer in the age of begging. We are the masters of the sky." Those footage spread across Africa, turning Traoré into a symbol of a new generation of leaders, not only knowing how to hold guns, but also knowing how to hold technology. But remember, this battle is not over. Because every step the Sahel takes, the enemy tries to build more barriers. The West understands that Russian satellites are not just military tools, but also the seeds of a future where Africa can build its own space industry. And when that day comes, no one can keep Africa in bondage. That is why every attack is more intense, more fierce. However, from the ashes of many years of oppression, the Sahel has found the most precious thing, a fearless spirit. Young people holding flags, chanting, "If you wanted to subdue us, you would have done it generations ago. Now, we see the sky." Part 5 ends in paradox. The more the Sahel is surrounded, the more united it becomes, the more the West strikes, the more desperate it becomes. But in the heart of that pride, there is also a danger lurking, because when the world shakes, there are always hands secretly seeking to betray from within. And that will be the secret waiting for the next episode. Not all wounds come from the outside. Sometimes, the fatal stab is delivered from behind, by those who once swore allegiance. While the West is closing in, while the people of the Sahel are closing in, a darkness is quietly creeping into the center of power. And that blow has stunned the entire alliance. In March, amid the jubilation of the Russian satellites that had sent back the first accurate data on crops and security, a sudden leak broke out. A group of senior officers in the Nigerian army had secretly contacted Western agents. The exposed documents showed that they had promised to facilitate the technical failure of satellite control facilities in Niamey in exchange for property and asylum in Europe. The news struck like a bolt from the blue. People took to the streets, shouting indignantly, "Traitors deserve to die." But for the coalition leaders, the shock was even more terrible. It turned out that even within the ranks that had been considered the shield of the fatherland, there were still people willing to sell out the fate of the nation for just a few suitcases of money. Ibrahim Traoré, upon receiving the report, was silent for a long time. Then he said only one sentence: "We have won the battle with the enemy outside. But now, we must prove that we are strong enough to win against ourselves." The betrayal did not stop in Niger. A week later, the satellite system suddenly malfunctioned. The signal from a station on the outskirts of Bamako was interrupted for hours. Engineers investigated and discovered that a spyware had been planted from within. Each piece of malicious code showed that it was written in Western standards. It could not have been accidental. Someone had opened the door from the inside, allowing the enemy to penetrate deep into the heart of Sahel technology. In closed meetings, the atmosphere was heavy. Faces that had fought side by side in many battles were now under the microscope of suspicion. Who sold their souls? The question echoed in every corridor of power. Traoré understood that if not dealt with decisively, trust would collapse. And an alliance that lost trust from within did not need shells from outside to self-destruct. In a night kept in the strictest secrecy, the three leaders of the Sahel, Traoré, Goïta, Tiani, met. They decided to set up an internal security and integrity committee, with powers over the army and the government, to root out all traitors. The internal hunt began. Dozens of officers were interrogated, some were publicly arrested. The swift executions shook the whole region. The people, instead of being confused, were even more supportive. Because they knew, the most fearsome enemy is not bombs and bullets, but the hand of betrayal in the dark. New slogans rang out: "No tolerance for betrayal," and "The Sahel is only for those loyal to the people." Yet the twist left an indelible scar. It exposed that the Sahel revolution was not only facing Western empires, but also the specter of corruption, greed, and weakness within its own ranks. Traoré once admitted in a private conversation, "When we reclaim the sky, the enemy will try to take our hearts. And if our hearts are corrupt, all the satellites above will be useless." At that moment, the Sahel stood at a crossroads: either let the betrayal drag the movement into the abyss, or turn this blow into a litmus test, to purify, to mature, to move forward stronger. And history will remember, it was in the darkness of betrayal that the flame of the Sahel's faith burned brighter than ever. Tonight, the Sahel sky was lit by artificial dots of light, no longer the flares of war, but satellites, the symbol of a new era. Despite all the conspiracies, sieges, and betrayals from within, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso still stand firm, still hold their heads high. The enemy wanted to turn the Sahel into a desert of despair, but the people turned it into a fire of enlightenment. History will remember that for the first time, Africa no longer looked up to the sky as a conquered country, but as a master. It was from this despised land that the Sahel rewrote the rules of the global game, with will, with blood, with technology. And that flag was raised high not only for the Sahel, but for the entire continent yearning for freedom. Now, the responsibility no longer lies solely on the shoulders of Traoré, Goïta, or Tiani. It lies on the shoulders of every young person. Every hand, every voice. If you believe that this struggle is not only for the Sahel but for all humanity yearning for freedom, please share your thoughts in the comments. And if the spirit of the Sahel touches your heart, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, so that we can become a community, and together keep the flame burning. Now it's our turn, to unite, persevere, and continue writing the epic chapter of freedom.